Dr. Lynda Davis, Chief Veterans Experience Officer, Department of Veterans Affairs. She is the subject matter expert on successful and sustainable services and support for military, veterans, and the families, caregivers, and survivors for nonprofit organizations, agencies, corporations, colleges, and universities. Dr. Davis has previously served as Deputy Assistant Secretary of the Navy, Deputy Undersecretary of Military, Community, and Family Policy, where she met our very own Dr. Mary Keller and fell in love with MCEC. Dr. Davis joins us today to share her insights on the unique needs of today's veteran families. Please give a nice, warm MCEC welcome to Dr. Lynda Davis.
Whoa. Good morning, everybody. Did you have a good breakfast? I appreciate Ashley's discussion of the panic, the operator versus the panic, and I think this morning I was a little panicked in traffic, and I apologize for being a little bit later than I intended to, and I really was sitting back there saying, I wish I had known how to operationalize so many of those things as a veteran, as a former service member, as the mother of three children who was serving. I just want to take a little bit of time this morning to share with you what my experience was and how that lived experience has informed me as I'm now able to work with our veterans and the commitment that the Secretary of Veterans Affairs has to support all of you in the communities and schools where you live as you support our military and veteran kids. Former Army signal officer. I joined late in life, and I joined with a 1-year-old. And that was a very interesting experience as I got sworn in. I then, a couple years later, had another child, and I went to Officers Basic with a child who was about 3 months old. And that separation for some time was hard for all of us. Later in my service, we decided to adopt a daughter. I had 2 little boys. And that decision at 8 years in the military really caused me to think, as it does for many, many service members, especially women, where were my priorities at that time and how we were juggling, because my husband was working full-time and having to take care of the kids when I was gone. And so we decided that as a family, the best service I could do at that point was no longer to be in uniform, but to be really in the civilian sector, supporting those who were still in uniform and their families and loved ones who support them. So I've been very honored to have the jobs I had, including learning so much from Mary. I'm an educator by background and a psychologist, a clinician. So I come at this from a variety of different roles, but I want to share with you what we were able to do, recognize in the Department of Defense about 10 years ago in the midst of the most horrendous losses in Iraq and Afghanistan. And I was working in the Wounded Warrior reform area for President Bush, and began to really understand clearly that when I went to Bethesda or Walter Reed, right alongside that bed was a family. It could have been parents, but oftentimes with this generation, it was the younger spouse and small children. And to see them next to a father who no longer had any limbs and was trying to think how he would support them for the rest of their life and how he would relate to them had such an impact. It was imperative for me to understand that when we talk about our service members or veterans, they come with families. They're part of a family, and we have to do all of our planning as bureaucrats and providers and policymakers and clinicians teachers in the classroom, we have to understand how to meet them where they are. And so I was fortunate to be able to do a lot of clinical and non-clinical reform of the way in which we did things for our service members who were wounded and for their families, informed by people like Mary and MCEC. And one of the things we did is we ensured that when we were hearing testimony from the families, that we had it from the children also. So I had the first young lady who had taken care of her mother for a year and a half in Walter Reed. She was a teenager growing up in Walter Reed as a caregiver with an autistic brother at home that she also cared for. And she was there testifying at the Pentagon. First time it had ever happened. Maddie embodied the theme of your conference. The challenges that she faced were enormous, enormous. Having to leave her home, leave school, be by her mother's bedside, and then the strength that she has developed. Not only is she an all-star softball player who's went on to have a scholarship, but she's now married herself and doing very, very well. But I learned from Maddie, and I learned about the technically difficult times and places and the challenges of weaving through a bureaucracy in a hospital and then trying to go to school. But I also learned about the challenges of the heart, of what happens when kids are not just as a teenager, but as very young children, when they're put into the role of caregiver, of provider, of leader of the home. That does something to them. And I just want us all to be conscious as we're supporting these children of all ages to ask about their, if we don't know, to ask, you know, do you have a parent who's ever served in the military? Do you have a parent at home now, or a grandparent who's a veteran? So that we can begin to understand their stories and begin to understand what is shaping their life currently, what challenges they may have faced, and what strengths they may have developed, their resiliency from their experiences. Being around other children in a military community can increase your identification and your responsibility in a very positive way. But we also need to understand those who struggle. And my daughter was one who struggled. Unfortunately, when I was a veteran, my husband died suddenly and fairly tragically. And that impacted my 14-year-old in a way that still goes on 5.5 years later. It impacted her ability at school. She could not study. She could not be around other kids. It's prevented her from going on from college as a very bright young lady. She had to have 504s. We're still not sure how she's going to make it. And people like Mary have been a great assistance to me to understand, especially in her high school years. How do I support a child? And how do I support the teachers understanding her? That her sullenness or her reluctance to speak up in class or her inability to turn in that paper is not because she's obstinate or stubborn or stupid. It's because her brain has been shattered. Her emotions have been shattered by what has happened to her in her life. And she just can't put the pieces back together. Now, she had a wonderful tutor, a wonderful teacher who stayed with her after school every day and at weekends, and who became part of our family to support her. She had a team of professionals on the 504 and the IEP, and some of them understood empathetically. They were all professional, but I just urge you to understand the challenges the kids face. And I'm so glad, because I know every one of you who are here already get that, or you wouldn't be here. So your commitment to our military children is wonderful. I was talking about my daughter as a veteran child, and so I want to tell you a little bit about what the Secretary of Veterans Affairs has enabled us to do. We understand, even though when the old adage is, when you joined the military, you were not issued a wife. You know, if the Marine Corps wanted you to have a wife, they would have issued one, and then they issued the kids. It's not that way anymore. We understand that. The same, so military families come with transition also. As the service member transitions to veteran status, the family transitions, and that in itself is another challenge. And you may find when you're working with some children and young adults and youth that they look okay, but it's important to recognize what phase they are in their service, because they also serve too. So we in the VA are now making a very intentional effort to recognize that the veterans come with families too. So the Secretary has allowed me, in my role, to form a Federal Advisory Committee, which is a fairly formal process, but it establishes a veteran, family, caregiver, and survivor advisory committee that will be membered by very significant high-level individuals with lived experience and with professional and subject matter expertise. This will allow us to research areas that are very important. And on my goal is to make sure we're including the impact on children of veterans, because because the engagement extends the rest of their lifetime. The veteran may come out and be focused on where moving, where I'm going to go to work, that kind of a thing. Well, the child is adjusting to a whole new environment, especially if they've been active duty and lived on base. So we have to be conscious of them, particularly in the case where there's a family that has had some visible or invisible wounds of war. I seem to, I dress up every day, I brush my teeth. I have PTSD, and that's just one of the things that you can't see about me. So I have to try very hard to make sure I've got it together, which is why I love the previous speaker. And my kids have to understand. For a long time, I didn't know how to articulate it to them. If you have a grandparent in your home who was in World War II or even Vietnam, and you know that they were in the war, but you never know, they never talk about it, they never say anything. A lot of us don't know how to say what happened. But that impacts the way we relate to our children. So I'm asking you to support us at the VA as we try to pay conscious attention to the fact that we have children of veterans, millions, millions and millions and millions. We've got well over 50,000, 50 million children of veterans. And frankly, that's where we expect to get our all-volunteer force. Those children and their family are all influencers. They're going to determine whether we're able to defend our country based on their experience. And I appreciate that each of you is going to go to the extra effort to make sure all those children, whether as students or whether they're involved in some of your organizations, are really able to tell their exciting stories of how they've overcome challenges and share their strengths because they want to be in service. That's part of their culture. That's part of their DNA. But to also recognize that, like my daughter, they may have challenges, some that you can see and some that you can't see. And another thing that we will be doing in addition to the advisory committee is we will be working on the transition process. We had one a meeting yesterday, and I invited the senior leader wives from the military to make sure we understand that point of getting out of the military, becoming a veteran, so that we include the family in that process. I want to make a commitment from the Secretary of the Veterans Affairs that we will work closely with veteran families, which includes the children of all ages. We will work with MCEC, and I'm just extremely honored and appreciative of all the work that you do. It means a great deal. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the stage Dr. Mary Keller.
Very, very much.